Good evening and welcome to the Norwich Historical Society. I'm Judy Brown, the director here, and we're kicking off our holiday season tonight with talk about the evolution of the holiday, Christmas from the 17th century to 1900. Just a reminder about cell phones off. I hope you have taken a few minutes. We'll take a few minutes afterwards or come back and look at our rooms newly decorated for festive Victorian holiday with amazing collection of Tony Prince in one room, children's playroom, and all sorts of stuff from our collection, and a wonderful gingerbread house, a reproduction of the Norwich Inn when it was called the Newton Inn around in the 1890s. Gingerbread house made by Annette Brown. And I would just definitely want to thank Gail Sanders, Annette Brown, Jane Corey, and Tony Prince for making this holiday, the festive Lewis house, decorated for this holiday. I hope you'll come back. We have or invite your family and friends to come on Sunday. This Sunday we'll have a public open house from 2 to 4 with refreshments to open us up for the community. Tonight we welcome our very special guest speaker, Ken Torino, who is manager of community engagement and exhibitions for Historic New England. I'll let him tell you a little more about Historic New England. Wonderful organization. He also currently serves on the Council of the American Association for State and Local History. He's published several articles on this subject and speaks widely on this and other topics. We know Ken locally. He's the moving force behind the documentary many of you have seen or should see, Back to School, Lessons from Norwich One-Room Schoolhouses, a film he created in partnership with Community Access Television, who's here taping tonight, the Root District Game Club, Beaver Meadow Schoolhouse Association, and the Norwich Historical Society. The film was released earlier this year and has helped raise money for the preservation of the remaining schoolhouses in Norwich. We got to know Ken when he came here to look through all our photos of schoolhouses, and took them off to Historic New England and scanned them for his project. And we were very fortunate in that when he returned them, he also gave us all the scans, high quality scans, so it's a real win-win. So we thank you for that. And so please join me in welcoming Ken Torino.
Thank you all for coming out, and I'll tell you honestly, it's a real pleasure for me to come back. Any excuse I have to come to Norwich, I take it. And it was really a wonderful experience working on the documentary film. How many of you have seen the film? Okay. Well, those of you who haven't, it's being shown on CATV. I don't know the schedule, you'll have to watch. And I know Brian Cook, who is the president of the Root District Game Club, correct, Brian?
Yes,
here? Is
exactly.
it you may have some other showings, public showings?
Well, at the very least, if you go to our website, which is rootschoolhouse.org, there's a link that says documentary, and that'll take you right there. So it's available 24/7 from our website. So.
And it's also on the Historic New England website, which leads me into Historic New England. Some of you, I hope, are familiar. How many of you know Historic New England? A few of you, good. Historic New England is the largest regional heritage organization in America. And we own 37 historic sites in 5 of the New England states. And I'm very pleased to announce we have our first partnership site in Vermont. This is breaking news. I know. This is, yes, you didn't know that out here. This is with the Henry Sheldon Museum in Middlebury, Vermont. So I will be doing and have worked up there for quite a while. So we're really, really excited about that because, you know, we've wanted to do more and more in Vermont for a long time. And why do we do all this? Well, as you can see, it is to serve the public. Besides those historic houses, we also own collections. We have a library and archives with 1 million documents, photographs, artifacts. There's 100,000 artifacts in our collection, including items from Vermont. We've always collected those. But the reason we collect, and it's the same with the Norwich Historical Society, we do all this, us museums, to make to be public institutions and invite the public in. But what I'm here really to do today is talk about the history of Christmas in actually 4 centuries. I'm going to bring us pretty close up to the present day. And I'm going to go fairly quickly because there's a lot to cover here. If you have questions, I really would like to hear them from you, and I will try to answer them. I won't necessarily have the answers to all of them. So, the celebration of Christmas today is the most important holiday of the year for most people. Many of the customs that we take for granted as part of the current holiday festivities and religious celebrations actually developed slowly over time. And that's what I hope to show you in this presentation, how what we think of as a traditional Christmas today really evolved over time. Now, the original settlers to New England were the Puritans, and they avoided the celebration of Christmas for 2 main reasons. Who could hazard a guess what one of those reasons were that the Puritans avoided Christmas, did not celebrate Christmas?
Too festive?
Yes, absolutely. All right, that's one. Another?
Catholics did.
Pardon?
Catholics did.
Yes. And the Catholics, yes, that's a big part of it. So in England, these celebrations were rowdy. They were too festive, and the Puritans did not like that. In England, they included exchanging gifts for goodwill, dancing, songs, feasting, begging, and lots of drinking. Christmas was an occasion when the social hierarchy itself was symbolically turned upside down in a gesture that inverted designated roles of gender, age, and class. Those near the bottom of the social order could act high and mighty. And men might dress like women, and women, even more scandalously, might dress and act like men. This is a slide of the mummers, and you might have heard of the mummer traditions. The mummer tradition is still alive in Philadelphia. If you've ever been there for that, so you're nodding your head.
Yeah, that's something.
It's one of the weirdest things I've experienced, and it does include lots and lots of drinking. So the other reason, though, was they did say, like the Catholics believed, Christmas was not in the Bible. It does not say in the Bible that December 25th is Christ's birthday. There's no biblical sanction that states what a day was. Okay? So that was another reason the Puritans were not interested in December 25th as a holiday. So here we have the Lord of Misrule. Young people might imitate and mock their elders. A peasant might become Lord of Misrule and mimic the authority of a real gentleman. So this is what was going on in England at the time. So when the Puritans assumed power, the Puritan Parliament made a point of holding regular sessions each December 25th from 1644 through 1656. And it did what it could to suppress the traditional observance of the day. Now in New England, the Puritans were largely successful in putting the celebration down. And this is a later illustration of Governor William Bradford. As early as 1621, 1 year after the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, the Governor Bradford, on December 25th, found some of the colonists out, quote, gaming and reveling in the streets, and he ordered them right back to work. Okay? A lot of people don't realize that Christmas was actually outlawed. In 1659, the General Court of Massachusetts outlawed the observance of Christmas in the colony. Anyone found keeping Christmas was fined 5 shillings. And why are they doing this? Because these celebrations did persist. And they were trying to, again, suppress them. This ban was not repealed until 1681 by the Massachusetts General Court. And one of the reasons why it was repealed is because Cromwell and the Puritans were out. The monarchy comes back in, and in England, the former Christmas celebrations are starting to come back. The first recorded Christmas service held in Boston took place at the Townhouse. This is an illustration of what they believe the building looked like in 1686. So that's the first recorded Christmas celebration, but it was not popular. With that said, not everyone, and you can see in this pamphlet, was against Christmas. This says from 1647, Christmas is good. So it's trying to tell people Christmas is okay. As does this, which makes fun of the Puritans. This was done in 1686, and it mocks the Puritans who had suppressed Christmas, but they at this point had already been out of power. The Puritan jurors that are putting Father Christmas on trial here bore such names as Mr. Cold Kitchen, Mr. Give Little, and Mr. Hate Good. So to show you a little bit more throughout this talk how things are evolving. Now, almanacs were popular both in England and America. Has anyone ever heard the term Red Letter Day? Okay, yeah. So tell me, what is a Red Letter Day?
A good day.
A good day, yeah.
An exceptional day, a day that's different than other days.
It is, and it's. Did you say?
Holiday?
It's a holiday. It was a saint's day. So now we think of it more as a good day, or it is a special day. In England, saints' days were known as red letter days because in English almanacs they were printed in red ink. Red letter day. In Puritan 17th century Massachusetts, almanacs did not refer to December 25th as Christmas. Puritans did not want that. But John Tully of Sabre, Connecticut changed this with his notorious Boston Almanac of 1688 by boldly labeling December 25th as Christmas Day. In capital letters, you can see with the arrow there. He also added every one of the red letter days recognized by the Church of England. Now, as I said, the Puritans were highly successful in suppressing Christmas. It was still a regular workday in the colony during the 18th century, although services were held by certain denominations. In 1719, Judge Samuel Sewall cautioned, this is a quote, "New England men came hither to avoid anniversary days, the keeping of them, such as the 25th of December. How displeasing must it be to God, the giver of our time, to keep anniversary days, to play the fool with ourselves and others." Now that same year, this almanac, and if you look at the arrow, put a little note in over the Christmas season, and it says, "Do not let your children and servants run too much abroad at night." Because they were. Even though the Puritans tried, they didn't succeed totally. A sermon of 1729 by John Barnard states, "It looks something odd to select a day and keep it, when at the same time they know it was not the day of his nativity." He goes on to say that the celebration was introduced by the Catholic Church to please the pagans, to take their festival days and convert them to Christian use. So again, this is referring back that it does not say in the Bible anything about specifically December 25th. So I want to show you now how Christmas is starting to creep in. Again, you saw with the almanacs. These are broadsides, and broadsides another name for posters that were put up in the colonial period on walls or to announce news. And one of the oldest traditions we have associated with Christmas is shown here, and it's hard to read, so I'll just describe it. On one side, you have the Boston Carrier's Address, and then the lamplighters. Lamplighters were important. They lit the lamp so you could see. And in this here, the Boston Carrier's Address from 1770, it talks about giving tips to newspaper boys. And this is in keeping with the older European tradition of begging at Christmas. Okay? And what that broadside says is, "Kind sirs, your generous bounty flow, few shillings on your lad bestow." So, again, at the Christmas season, begging. And the Lamplighters broadside is from 1826. Now, what's happening in the early 19th century is that the population of the colonies, not the colonies anymore, the early country, is burgeoning, growing, bringing with it a more ethnically and religiously diverse population. So the celebration of Christmas really depended on your religious affiliation. Congregationalists continued to abstain from keeping Christmas. But it was in the urban centers that this growing celebration of Christmas can be seen. Only a small minority of people kept Christmas until mid-century in the rural areas. But slowly you see the signs emerging, as I've been saying. And in my research, what I did is I looked at a lot of newspapers of the time. I also looked at a lot of diaries, and I looked at a lot of letters. And in the area around Boston, one of the best diaries is Dr. Bentley's Diaries of Salem, Massachusetts. And he wrote on December 25th, 1810, he comments on the growing number of religious services at Christmas. Quote, Christmas has a public service in the morning from English Episcopalians and in the evening from the Universalists. Our congregational church stands fast as they were from the beginning, meaning no celebration with them. So it was, the debate grew about keeping Christmas, and it was discussed in sermons like this one that you see here, and also in editorials in newspapers. And one from 1825 from Lynn, Mass., which was reprinted in Norwich, in the Norwich Courier, Norwich, Connecticut. It shows the changing attitude towards the holiday. The article argues in favor of celebrating the day, stressing its religious importance. When a period approaches so replete with blessings to the whole world, it becomes a religious people to reflect upon the importance of its observation. Okay, now I want you to listen to this part carefully and tell me what were the most important holidays in early America. And this is the quote. Shall we, while we celebrate the birthdays of heroes, and that in which our fathers shook off with gigantic energy the yoke placed upon us by a foreign power, suffer the period to pass unheeded and unnoticed? So what were those two, the biggest holidays of the year? Wasn't Christmas, 4th of July, the yoke, okay, getting rid of that yoke put on us by a foreign power. And what was the other one?
President's Day, Washington's
Well, which president? Washington's birthday, that president. Those were the two biggest holidays in the early republic, those, not Christmas. And let's see, hold on. So I want to go on and talk about one of the other early customs, I should say. And that here has to do with greenery. Begging is one of the earlier ones, giving tips to newspaper boys and the like, but also decorating with greenery. In the first half of the 19th century, with certain denominations, you could find the custom of decorating churches, not homes, with greenery. Joseph Y. a Lynn Cordwainer, or shoemaker, mentions this sentiment in his diary entry for December 26, 1819. When he writes, the church was handsomely draped with green boughs the day previous to Christmas. An 1827 article explains the custom of holly in churches by stating, tradition says the first Christian church in Britain was built of boughs because the monks built their temples in that manner, probably to imitate the temples of Saturn, which were always under the great oak. The great feast of Saturn, or the Saturnalia, was held in December, and as the oaks were then without leaves, monks obliged the people to bring in boughs and sprigs of evergreen. So here you see King's Chapel in Boston, and this is mid-19th century here, all decorated with the greenery. It stands out pretty well here. And this is a scene of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, the top one, in Lynn, Massachusetts, and the bottom is actually from Skowhegan in Maine. A small publication, Christmas Eve for the pupils of the South Parish Sunday School, published in 1853 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, described the interior of a church as wreathed in evergreens, each pillar garlanded with flowers, interspersed with beautiful wreaths, and covered with flowers surmounted by an evergreen cross. In 1853, Anne Longfellow Pierce of Portland, Maine, wrote to Mary Longfellow Greenleaf, I do wish you could see our little chapel now, so tastefully dressed with evergreens. It is really beautiful. Now, diaries show that December 25th for most people remained a working day well into the 19th century. Entries in diaries of Joseph Lye, who I mentioned before, reveal, quote, Christmas helped kill James Phillips' hog. His weight, 583 pounds. An afternoon, killed our hog. His weight was 435. He goes on to mention a marriage taking place that day and the next year a burial. And in 1829, he's out working in his shoe shop when he writes, warm enough to keep up the shop window. So these are not things we associate with Christmas, killing your hogs, going to weddings or funerals on Christmas Day. For midwife Martha Ballard of Hollowell, Maine, it was a regular working day, although she, like Lye, occasionally noted the day in her diary as Christmas. Now, I want to go on and talk about Christmas trees. Greens in churches come in first. Now Christmas trees. What you're looking at here is the very first image we have of a Christmas tree in America. Okay? Christmas trees were recorded in America as early as 1810 among German immigrants in Pennsylvania. And it was not until later in the century that it gained popular acceptance. So this is actually from the Winterthur Museum. It's a sketch in the Pennsylvania countryside from between 1812 and 1819 by John Louis Krimmel, a German painter who had immigrated to Philadelphia. The Germans play a big role in Christmas, and you're going to hear more about this. Christmas trees were being promoted as a timeless tradition, but they were actually a relatively new tradition in Germany itself. Originally in the 18th century, they were a local custom in Germany. And it was not until the 1830s that trees became a national practice, again, in Germany. Their popularization in America was spread in magazines and books. The first, probably a German story, published in a Boston Unitarian magazine, the Athenaeum, in 1820. And the Unitarians played a big part also in the celebration of Christmas. And that's interesting because of what we know about Unitarians. It was by reading about Christmas trees, not by seeing them, that most Americans learned about the custom. And where did most Americans at that point see a Christmas tree? Not in a home. It was at a local church fair, and you see a ticket for one here, or a Sunday school that most people of the mid-19th century probably encountered their first Christmas tree. Now, many of the fairs were sponsored by the Unitarians, who promoted the Christmas tree in the idea of Christmas in their publication. And the reason that they're doing this is, again, because that rowdiness that I talked about still in some areas persisted. Not so much with the Yankees, but you'll hear a little bit more about this too. So it's interesting, this is another ticket for one of those. I love this, Christmas tree and social hop. I want to know what a social hop is. But they're advertising, hey, come and see a Christmas tree. And for many people it would be the first one. Holiday fairs, still very much with us today, usually featured baked goods and handicrafts made by the ladies of the church for sale. And this is really interesting to me because this is the season now we're getting into, church fairs. They're one of the older traditions. And I had to include a recent one. I live in Nahat, smallest town in Massachusetts. And this is our church fair. It's happening at the end of the month, but that's last year's. So some of the church fairs, especially in the 19th century, featured some kind of tableau, some kind of entertainment. And it might be a scene from Dickens' Great Expectation. Another one I found was called The Union as It Will Be After the Rebellion is Crushed and the Chain of Slavery is Broken. Now what's interesting about those, they're not Christmas themes, you know? They're not Christmas themes. Now I want to show you the first printed image we have in America of a Christmas tree. And this one was done in Boston in 1836 as the front piece to The Stranger's Gift, a gift book. I'll talk about gift books in a little while. And it was written by a German immigrant, Hermann Bochum. Now, early trees, like you see here, were usually set atop a table and decorated with toys, candy, fruit, ribbon, garlands, and candles. Now, oops, went the wrong way. Sorry. Here we go. you see here, and here. Okay. Now, has anyone ever had a Christmas tree with candles, with real candles? There's always someone. Okay.
Every year.
Every year. Okay, so can you explain how it's done? Because it's done a little differently.
Yeah, well, they have these little metal clips and you put the candles in, and they've got a little rim around the edge to catch the wax, although it usually doesn't catch all the wax. And the objective is to get it up, standing up straight. If you do that, they'll burn down totally and be consumed. Otherwise, they'll may run and drip a little bit. But you have to make sure, I noticed on these trees, they cut out a lot of the inner branches.
Yeah.
So that the flames won't ignite the rest of the tree. The way you do it nowadays is you put them on the edge of the branches so there's nothing above it, so there's no draft. And then when you light them from the top down, so you're not leaning over the candles as you're lighting them, which is very bad. And then you put them out in reverse order.
This is the best description I've ever had. Yeah, but there's more to it. Yeah.
Something to add, when we lived in Berlin, we're trying to be like the rest of the local people, and we had one, and we had a wonderful fire on Christmas Day. And it went up like a torch.
Yes, and so most people kept something close by.
The fire extinguisher.
Well, usually it was a bucket of water or sand, period, before fire extinguishers. But I'll tell you, it must be a beautiful sight. And a lot of the descriptions I have read about in the period, 19th century, is that they were lit for just a short time, too. You're talking about letting your candles burn down. But in the period, in the 19th century, they usually were not kept burning for very long. And I think it must be a really charming sight to see. One day I will.
It's magical.
Yeah, I bet.
We usually read a story around the tree just by candlelight.
Sounds nice. So these two images help to popularize the Christmas tree. One on the one on the left is actually printed in London, the London Evening News from 1848. And then 2 years later, it jumps the pond and comes to America in 1850, the one on the right, and that was in Godey's Lady Book. And it was things like Godey's Lady Book, these popular magazines or newspapers of the day that spread the word about Christmas trees. But who is that couple?
Queen Victoria.
and Albert.
And Albert. Okay. So where was Prince Albert from?
Germany.
Prince Albert brings the Christmas tree from Germany to England. Okay? That's how these ideas spread physically with a person. He's a German. He implants this custom in England. It's really interesting. And then 2 years later, that same illustration comes over to America. Joseph Kidder of Manchester, New Hampshire, wrote in his journal in 1851, "Though the tree was thought scarcely more than a day, yet it grew as if by magic, and bore fruit in abundance in its season. There were nearly 70 different articles suspended from its evergreen branches, making a very beautiful and attractive appearance." And the first ornaments were generally homemade. And magazines like Harper's Weekly and Godey's Lady's Book often had articles and instructions on how to make these ornaments. Now the first glass ornaments appear in the mid-1860s, and guess from where? Germany. There were whole villages devoted to this industry of making glass ornaments. And they were generally, in America, when they got over here, sold separately, not in sets like we might do today. And as you were describing, here are some of the candle holders. These are all different kinds, some with a clip, and this one with a counterweight here, which is kind of interesting. So ornaments go from handmade to buying them first individually and then in sets. Now, I want to go on and talk a little bit about perhaps the most popular secular Christmas symbol, Santa Claus, who was readily accepted at a growing number of church festivals during the 1840s and 50s. He had been introduced to Americans in New York as St. Nicholas, whose feast day is coming up on December 6th, and this is an image an icon actually of St. Nicholas. And it was popularized by Washington Irving in his 1809 Knickerbocker's History of New York. And this is where New York plays a big role in promoting Santa Claus and trying to get away from the rowdiness by trying to create a family holiday. Santa Claus's place as a uniquely American icon was assured by the publication in 1823 of New Yorker Clement C. Moore's An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas. This charming poem, written for his children, helped to popularize the image of St. Nicholas flying through the sky with a reindeer on Christmas Eve, leaving presents for good boys and girls. Now, this was being popularized as an old Dutch tradition, but in reality, it was an invented tradition. Washington Irving helped to invent this tradition. And I want to show you some early, and that's Washington Irving on that slide, in his book. I want to show you some early images of Santa Claus, and I want you to look at these closely. This is a painting by Robert Weir in the New York Historical Society from 1837. So look at this picture. This is the very first visual representation of St. Nicholas to be widely distributed. It's a woodcut from 1841, and it was published in the New York weekly paper called Brother Johnson. Okay? And I was at an antique show in New York, and I found this for sale, which was actually taken from a riverboat by John Vanderline. The artist painted this for the riverboat, clearly taken from that illustration. Okay? Now let's look at a couple of others. Now Santa Claus also went by some other names, another one being Kris Kringle, particularly in the Pennsylvania area. So this is a piece of sheet music from 1845. Look at these pictures. This is from 1848. Look at Santa Claus. All right? And oh, this is one of my favorites. Look at this Santa Claus. Santa Claus is being drawn by a turkey, and he's got all these wine bottles, and he looks a little like he's had lots of the wine. Now, does anything strike you odd about these Santa Clauses?
It's not red.
Ah, you said one thing? What?
There's no red.
There's no red, okay? Here he's wearing blue, a blue cape. All right, very good. Anything else?
Fat.
What's that?
Fat. There's no beard there.
No beard. Yeah, no beard here. This one, look at, he's a young guy, blonde hair, curly, no beard, nothing.
Portrait of Santa Claus as a young man.
There you go. But what the point about these is that there's no one has set what Santa Claus is supposed to look like yet. There's no real description. In the poem, and let's go to the poem, this is the illustration that's in the first illustrated edition, full-length edition, of A Visit from St. Nicholas that was published in 1848 under Moore's name. Previously to that, it was anonymous. And he talks about Santa going down the chimney and riding his sleigh, but he portrays him as a plebeian and says in the poem he looked like a peddler and a jolly old elf. Well, some of these pictures don't look so jolly even to me, and especially those ones where he looks very unhappy. So the way we think of Santa Claus is going to evolve over time. So in 1863, here's another illustration with a sled, riding a sleigh. And this one I wanted to include because this is where we first get elves coming into the picture. And this was published in Harper's Weekly in 1857, and you can see they're very faint here, but Santa's elves there making the toys. And elves became a staple of Victorian literature. So they get sort of glammed on to Santa Claus. And this is Thomas Nast, the famous illustrator and cartoonist, his first illustration of Santa Claus. And it's really interesting because now we start to see Santa with a beard. Over time, Santa would evolve. He would lose his plebeian character and become large and jolly. nasted him many times until we get this. And this is sort of what set in stone what Santa's supposed to look like. Big belly, jolly, big cheeks, smoking a pipe, and so on. So it took time for us to set in stone what Santa's supposed to look like.
Ken, what year was that one?
This is 1881.
1881.
Yeah, 1881. And it was Nast who gave Santa a North Pole address. It was never said where he lived. He lived in a cold climate, but not where. So the decades from 1840 to 1870 saw Christmas become firmly established as the most popular holiday of the year. Quote, "Christmas seems to be growing in favor with people," began an advertisement from 1841, although resistance to these developments still lingered on. Preaching at Lynn's First Methodist Episcopal Church in December 1843, the Reverend James Porter bemoaned that a holiday might be established. So listen to his description of Christmas. "Of such days we have a few now, and sad days they are for morality. Instead of temperance and peace, there will be quarreling, fighting, and debauchery. Instead of righteousness, there will be sin. Instead of the triumph of heaven, there will be the triumph of hell." That's his description of Christmas. It could have been in response to this attitude that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote in his journal on December 25th, 1856, quote, "Not a very Merry Christmas. We are in a transition state here in New England. The old Puritan feeling prevents it from being a cheerful, hearty holiday, though every year makes it so." So he's referring, things are changing, but slowly, slowly. So a rowdy Christmas did not disappear. A domestic Santa did not obliterate other modes of celebrating the holiday, but a new view emerges which portrays Christmas as a family event. Quote, "Christmas also has a tendency to refine the feelings and to give domestic life a peculiar charm. It concentrates all our enjoyments in the domestic circle." This is from an article, a newspaper article from 1825. And here we have another that show these events as family-centered events. E. Warren Mudge, a future mayor of Lynn, Mass., when he wrote in his diary on December 25th, 1834, "May I pass many happy Christmas festivals in the bosom of this peaceful family." And here is another illustration we have that shows the family with the grandparents in the center and playing games at Christmas, but all about Christmas being heralded as an occasion for mutual good feeling, family gatherings, and the exercises of those charities so blessed in the sight of heaven. Okay, and that's from Gleason's Pictorial, 1853. Historian Stephen Nissenbaum wrote, "Religion failed to transform Christmas from a season of misrule into a quieter pleasure. It was the religion of domesticity which would be represented at Christmas time. And it was also during this time that people's view of childhood changed. In the colonial period, children were viewed and treated as small adults. They were treated as if they were adults. But now by the 19th century, particularly the Victorian period, it became more romanticized. It became a special time in one's life. And the central purpose of the family was not just to provide for the instruction of the children, as it had been in the past, but now also their happiness. Mary Pratt Sears of Boston and Waltham wrote in a letter on December 27, 1894, "I wish you could have seen the children. They were so lovely." Now, even at mid-century, Christmas was still a work day, but this too was starting to change. In 1847, E. Warren Mudge recorded in his diary, quote, he thought this was really strange, "Day more generally observed than usual. A large proportion of places, businesses, being closed by previous arrangement with the city. So now stores are actually starting to close on Christmas Day. Like it's turning to be the other way around these days, right? Yeah. But in that point, in that period, 1847, it was a big deal that stores were not opening on Christmas Day. By 1845, the day was a holiday in Connecticut. That was the first New England state to accept Christmas as a holiday. And it didn't become one in Massachusetts until 1856, and then Maine was the holdout until 1858. So, from the mid-1840s on, Santa was no stranger. Beside a busy schedule attending church fairs, he could be found at numerous retail establishments as well. In 1849, the following announcement was issued in the Lynn News. The venerable old Santa Claus announces to his friends that he has concluded to take up his residence at the Old Curiosity Shop during the Christmas and New Year holidays, where he would be happy to see any of his young friends, and to furnish them with almost anything they might want, both useful and ornamental, at very low prices. So we talk about commercialization of Christmas. I have to tell you, it was there from the beginning. It was there. And Lynn alone, his popularity had extended to the fact that he had to designate 3 stores as his official headquarters. And this is one of the earliest ads that I found of Christmas goods in the newspaper, so I've been going through. This rocking horse ad is from Boston in 1839. And if you notice, it will also say New Year's. As the popularity of the holiday began to grow, businesses began advertising their wares as presents. The earliest advertisements refer to New Year's gifts as often as Christmas offerings. In early advertisements, the seeds of the commercialization of the holiday were sown. Such holiday customs as the Christmas tree and Santa Claus, intimately connected as they both are with gift giving, might not have flourished to the extent they did without some kind of economic impetus. The maturation of the machine age provided just such a momentum. For the first time, mass production of inexpensive goods brought large-scale consumption within the reach of the general public. Merchants were not slow to take advantage of the opportunities thereby presented to them, and newspaper notices began to offer a huge variety of merchandise for both children and adults. And here you see one of those ads, and next to it is a gift book. Books were on the cutting edge of a commercial Christmas, making up more than half of the earliest items advertised as Christmas gifts, writes historian Stephen Nissenbaum. Publishers came up with a new product, a new literary genre known as the gift book. And this is one of the earliest from 1826. These books were designed for various age groups and might consist entirely of poetry. Others might be a compilation of stories and essays. Others were humorous. These books were specifically designed to be used as gifts. And here we have one from 1840. But this ad shows that books were not the only things that were given at Christmas. You can see dolls, dolls, toys, toys. Annie Jenkins of Lynn recalled receiving this doll in the 1860s. Quote, "She was sitting under a big tree, laden with presents. What other presents I had, I do not remember. The only of any importance was my beautiful dolly." So clearly she took care of this. This is now in the Lynn Museum. I'm going to the Longfellow House to speak in a couple of weeks in Cambridge. And this is a jumping jack given by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow to his daughter Edith Longfellow. And there's an inscription that goes with it, and it says, "Edith Longfellow from Santa in 1853. So jumping jacks. So just to show you a couple of the things that were given as gifts. Although New Year's Day continued to be mentioned, the major gift-giving day had clearly shifted to Christmas by the 1850s. Popular gifts for children included, as you can see in the ad, sleds, skates, books, dolls, and backgammon boards. And yeah. Oh, and I love the ad, also rattan for Christmas. Of course you'd want a rattan chair. Yeah. Oh, and actually here in Norwich, Judy was kind enough to do some research. And it's interesting because in a lot of these ads, when I was doing my research, some clothing was given. It was, but it wasn't the most popular kind of gifts. But we know clothing today is very much a popular gift. And let's see, Paul Metcalf, and I think it's from his diary. Is that what it's from, Judy?
Yeah.
that Nancy supplied for us.
Oh,
Nancy
okay.
Osborne.
So Nancy, was that from his diary?
Yeah.
Okay, so December 25th, 1936, just to show you how things continue, he was given, he wrote in his diary, Abby gave me some slippers and a necktie. Neckties are big. And Fred gave me $5. It seemed Fred always gave $5 there. And so on. So gift giving included clothing, but it became more popular, I think, as time went along, as we'll see.
I don't ever remember Paul wearing them.
See, there you go. Ella Lyman wrote in her journal on December 23rd, 1866, listen to this, quote, "Off early this morning to buy Abby's cuckoo clock, afterwards to McCarthy's to buy greens, home to dinner, and directly out again to buy 14 more presents. Finished at last at 6:30, having bought 147 presents since Tuesday afternoon." That was 5 days. She bought 147 presents. And that was in 1866. 1866. Now, Christmas, we think we're bad.
Where was that?
That was in Waltham, well, actually that was in Boston, Massachusetts. Ella Lyman. We own the Lyman Estates, one of our historic properties, but we own their summer house, and they also had a house on Beacon Hill. So again, taken from her diary. Now, Christmas shopping involved not just planning for presents, but for the holiday feast as well. I love this trade card, Santa throwing a plum pudding down the chimney. I don't know if it gets cooked as it goes down the chimney or whatever. Turkey seems to have secured a place as the roast of choice for Christmas Day. The success of the meal, however, could distinctly vary. In 1860, E. Warren Mudge's turkey was, quote, "done to a nicety," while in 1863 it was, quote, "very tough." And here are some images, and these are very interesting to me. You'll see a lot of things from the North Shore of Massachusetts because that's where I live and I used to run a museum there. These are both pictures from Lynn, Massachusetts. The Day family on the bottom, an Irish immigrant family, and at the top a very wealthy family, the Manny family. The Chase family. The Chase family is at the top, very wealthy family. But look at what strikes me. There's no decorations here. But these are both labeled as Christmas dinner. If you look carefully at this one, right in the center though, you see the plum pudding. You do see that. So, let's see. And December 24th, 1898, Ellen Sargent in her diary in Norwich here wrote, "Pleasant, quite warm, a nice Christmas day. I baked meat and a pudding for dinner. We had a Christmas tree with presents on it, and we had oysters for supper." So that was their dinner here in Norwich. Here we have the turkey. An amusing glimpse of how the holiday might be celebrated among late Victorians was found in Ingles Home and Art magazine, published between 1887 and 1893. Now, the magazine featured art and needlework lessons along with cooking and other household tips for the housewife with ample leisure time. Daunting especially to the novice hostess were the 3 full pages devoted to carving a turkey, which began with this dire warning: "Let no lady embarrass the carver and herself by placing before him a fowl with joints so unyielding that every effort to separate them endangers the adjacent guests with an instantaneous visitation from His Majesty the turkey, and proclaim louder than words her unskillful cuisine." So I found a couple of other descriptions here too of what people had, and here in Norwich, it's interesting how things change over time or don't. So not everyone had a turkey for Christmas, and I found that throughout my research. In 1864, Phoebe B. Clark, for her Christmas dinner of 1864, prepared chickens, roast lamb, plum pudding, and donuts. Okay. Now here in Norwich, in 1936, December 25th, again, Paul Metcalf mentions that we had chicken for dinner and supper, and then we had squash and nut pie. Okay. Again, no turkey, so not everyone necessarily had turkey for dinner. The Bowen family of Connecticut and New York, and I include this because we own their summer house in Connecticut, we have their written remembrances. And in their home in Brooklyn, they had 26 for dinner in 1887, and this is the description. The dining room proving too small, the Christmas dinner was spread in the parlors. They go on to say that oysters, turkey, goose, fixings, cream, cake, fruit, and appetites all disappeared. The children recited poetry at the dinner table, including "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Now, children expected culinary treats in their stockings as well. And Clapp's Confectionery obliged with, quote, "a large stock of sugar toys and confectionaries, shell barks, chestnuts, fresh-baked peanuts with pears, apples, dates, and figs." I'm getting hungry. It all sounds pretty good. What's really interesting to me, too, though, that the hanging of stockings is actually a Dutch ritual. It's an adoption of a Dutch ritual. Clement C. Moore, in his poem, and this is the illustration from the first published book, says, "Santa filled all the stockings." And you can see, if you look very closely, the stockings aren't very big, but here they are hanging by the fireplace, right? And here's a glass lantern slide that shows the stockings there. And I love this one, the children opening them. In Portland, Maine, on December 25th, 1850, Anne Longfellow Pierce wrote to Mary Longfellow Greenleaf, "Santa Claus has done his mission in hen's room. The full stockings dangle at the bedside, ready for the dawn of day." And then probably a scene like this. Now later on, you didn't have to go to the trouble about buying individual gifts, but Sears and Roebuck would sell you a Christmas stocking already made up for only 98 cents. So following the Christmas dinner, the tree and the presents, people often spent the evening attending a musical or theatrical presentation. I did find some Christmas Day performances with seasonal themes dating back to 1826, but most of them weren't. So at the Lyceum in Lynn on Christmas night, there was a grand pantomime and gymnastic entertainment. But look at these. Look at what they're watching: Adopted Child, or Honeymoon, or How to Rule a Wife. You know, so this is what you're doing on Christmas Day. You know, it's not Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It's none of those seasonal things. It's really interesting. Now, Yankee sensibilities kept these affairs quiet, but the scene in New York and Philadelphia newspapers' accounts show that more often than not, these were rowdy. There are many accounts of people actually breaking down doors, demanding money, food, and drink. This was not uncommon happening in Manhattan. Lots of accounts. And that's one of the reasons why people like Washington Irving and Clement Moore are trying to make this a domestic holiday to get away from that rowdiness. And here are some early illustrations. This also took place in Philadelphia, and these are from Kris Kringle's show of 1845. And if you look closely, there are scenes of Misrule. You know, the kids all pushing here. In this, there's a little girl crying, someone's making noise. These are all showing that these are, Misrule, it was there. And again, people were trying to make it more of a family holiday. Now, this is also the time of the Civil War, and it did little to dampen the growing enthusiasm for Christmas. This is also a Thomas Nast illustration. And this is from a newspaper account in 1861. Notwithstanding the pressure of the times and the fact that the nation is deeply involved in a war for its existence, the people of this city, and we presume the same may be said of other places, seem to enjoy the Merry Christmas as much as ever. Now look at Santa here. He's wearing what? He's wearing the flag, yeah. And this goes back to his costume not being totally defined yet, but also showing that Santa was indeed a patriot. And these are some other illustrations by Thomas Nass showing gifts being sent to the soldiers during the war. Away serving in the 9th Massachusetts Volunteers, J.E. Hodgkins noted in his 1862 diary, "We are not forgotten. God has put it into the hearts of some kind ladies of Washington to look after us today, for which we are very thankful. They have furnished a splendid dinner for us, to which we have done ample justice." And here's some more scenes of the Civil War. The woman praying at home for her husband at Christmas Eve, who was away fighting in the war. And here, a soldier coming home during furlough over at the holidays. So, another, Ingalls Home and Art magazine, which I mentioned earlier, also echoed another theme which started reoccurring in late 19th century commentary on the holiday. Quote, "To eat, drink, and be merry is not the real keeping of the season, the true spirit of Christmas, but to befriend others less fortunate than ourselves or less happily circumstanced, to make some real sacrifice perchance for the happiness of another, and our Christmas a reflection, faint though it may be, of his pure unselfish love to man." Now look at this illustration, and this is on what we call a trade card. The woman in her finery being driven out by a horse and carriage, but look at the children. One of the little girls in the snow is in her bare feet. So doing good for others. And that's also echoed in this illustration where you see the bounty of the rich man's Christmas at the top and the meager Christmas of the poor man's Christmas. And that's a theme that I think we're all very familiar with because of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, which he popularized this theme of doing good deeds for others in 1843. This is actually the very first illustration, first book of Dickens' Christmas Carol that you see here. Okay. So the two aspects of the late Victorian holiday, remembrance of the poor and increasingly elaborate display and consumption, existed side by side. That many did generously remember the poor by no means guaranteed that there was no excessiveness shown at private celebrations. In 1903, schoolteacher Luther Atwood's son Joseph had, quote, about 30 presents at the tree exercise, as he called them, and Atwood himself never personally ate so much or felt so uncomfortable. Sound familiar? Yeah. So I've taken you up to the 1870s, and at that point, a lot of things are set with Christmas, but there are going to be some subtle changes and some new addition. One being the Christmas card. And what you're looking at is the first Christmas card ever produced. It was done in England, and this is the printer's proof from 1843, and it was commissioned by Henry Cole and designed by John Colcutt Horsley. And just in the last decade, this has been now authenticated as the very first Christmas card in America, and it's for a department store from 1851, Pieces Variety Store in the Temple of Fantasy. I really like that. Temple, fancy, there you go. And Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. So this is now considered the very first. But actually, New England played a big role in this, and it was Louis Prang of Boston, who is generally credited with the American Christmas card. He popularized it. He saw them gaining popularity in England. Now, I want you to look at these early Christmas cards and tell me what strikes you as being different.
Seasonal.
Yeah, right. Look at those. Okay? So, again, like with Santa Claus, we didn't have the imagery set. These things did have meaning to the Victorians. The symbolism of the egg, and so on, and maybe symbols of rebirth with Christ, and so on. But we had not set yet in stone what the imagery, what Christmas cards, as we think of, should look like. Prang saw his cards as works of art, and he held competitions in New York, and he found that his larger size cards like this, with the fringe, sold much better. And they reacted to popular artistic movements of the day. This one's kind of in the aesthetic style, popular of the day. And it was not till later that what we consider Christmas imagery, okay, bells, holly, greenery, the red and green, really caught on, okay? And you see that in many different ways. This is actually a Christmas card from Sarah Orne Jewett, a popular New England author. We own her house in South Berwick, and this is her Christmas card that she drew of her house in South Berwick. And actually,
When? What date?
that is good question. This could be as late as 1910. Maybe a little earlier. Good question. I'll have to look it up. So, Vermont has an important place in Christmas card lore. Do you know what that was? No? Yeah. The very first presidential Christmas card was issued by Calvin Coolidge. Yes. And this is it. So that's now become a very important tradition with the White House. But Calvin Coolidge started that. And Christmas cards, reflect the time periods that they're being done in. So I want you to look at this, and you can probably tell me the dates. The top one is what? Guess. Yeah, 30s from her dress. You can tell that. And the humorous one, I love that. Yeah, 70s, 80s. Yeah, exactly. Now, another addition with changing technology. Some of you might, and people still use these today, but the family Christmas cards with your picture on them, these become popular really after the war, after World War II. Did anyone do them earlier? I haven't found examples, and I had to include. That's actually me, because my godfather was a photographer, and that's his family there. When much later, you can look at the hairstyles. You can probably tell that too. So Christmas cards continue to evolve and change, and now we have electronic Christmas cards, right? Now another addition or change, well, has to do, not really a change, but writing letters to Santa Claus. That starts, this is a Thomas Nast illustration, and that is really starting in the 1870s that this starts to become popular, and you can see how popular it is there. I wanted to include this one because it's one in our collection at Historic New England. And it's from Stevie Phillips, and his writing is pretty bad, but in it he asks Santa Claus, and Stephen Phillips came from a very wealthy family, Chestnut Street in Salem. We own the house there, it's a house museum, and many people consider it one of the most beautiful streets in all of America. Stevie asked in that for an Indian costume, in that messy writing. He also asked for a pony and carriage. Well, Stevie must have been a good little boy, because there he is in his Indian costume. We still own the carriage, and he did get his pony. Okay, so I thought that was fun. And just to show you how popular, Christmas letters, these are the Boston letter carriers from, let me make sure, 1959, and also in Portland, the top ones are Portland in 1926. So, the post office has to do something with them. Now, another addition to Christmas celebration was this plant, the red crown plant, introduced from Mexico by Joel R. Poinsett, the first U.S. minister to Mexico, 1825 and 1829. Now, this developed slowly too. It could be found in greenhouses in California starting in the 1830s, and actually one family up until today had a monopoly on these. But it was not till the 1870s that it could be found for sale in cities like New York and Boston. So it took a while for this to sort of spread across the country to become what we know of today as kind of almost ubiquitous here. So the other thing that happened had to do with the Christmas tree. And I love in your display in these rooms because, and do go and look afterwards, you have the tabletop Christmas tree, which is what I talked about earlier. But as you go later into the century, right, by the 1880s, you have the floor to ceiling, and you'll see that in the front room also. So now that's a change. Most people did away with the tabletop. Didn't go away entirely, but floor to ceiling. And one of the house on the top is from Cambridge, Mass. The one on the bottom is my neck of the woods in Swampscott, Massachusetts. And here, this one's from Portland. And this is 1895, December 25th, from the Hicks family. So, technology is changing, and with that, we don't have candles as much anymore. You have electric lights. And you don't decorate just your tree with electric lights, you decorate your dining room table with them too. So, now, electric lights were one of the first manufactured items tailored especially to Christmas. So, also, something really important happened to Santa in 1899. Anyone know what happened in 1899? It was a big day for him.
Start
He
drinking
got married.
Coca-Cola.
That's a good guess. He gets married. You got that? You knew it? Okay. Well, and I say 1899 because that's when a book was published, Goody Santa Claus, you see right there, by Catherine Lee Bates. Okay? She created the character of Mrs. Claus in 1899. And there he is kissing. Before that, he just hung around with elves. So, 1899, he's married. So these were some changes. Public Christmas trees outside became bigger and more popular. This one being in Boston Common. And then also, a Vermonter had something to do with the first National Christmas tree. Calvin Coolidge established that. The first national Christmas tree. And that's what you're looking at, the very first one that he did. So, the decorating of shop windows and outdoor displays grew more extensive and elaborate as Christmas moved out of the domestic circle and became more of a public celebration. These are Macy's windows in New York, and they were famous. They're famous now, but they had mechanized windows. And this is from like the 1880s that these were going on. And then down in Boston, Jordan Marsh, Filene's Basement. These are images from different periods. In my childhood, we always went into Santa's Village, which a picture there. And at Santa's Village, you could have your picture taken with Santa Claus, and that's me again, and my brother. So I had to put those in. Yes. So we talked about commercialization always being a part of Christmas. Well, Santa Claus does drink Coke, as we said, and Santa does, eat candy. So Santa Claus was their businesses are marketing him even more. And this is what we're used to. Not so much maybe smoking, I think he gave smoking up now. I think he did. So in the 20th century, the commercialization of Christmas seems to have grown, and the selling of the Christmas holiday seems to come earlier every year. And, it's not even Thanksgiving, and I'm seeing Christmas commercials on TV. I saw things right after, Halloween. It seems to be coming earlier and earlier all the time. Now, in the 20th century, and I'm going to wind up very soon here, there were some other developments I just want to get into. One is the artificial Christmas tree, okay? And guess who developed the first artificial Christmas tree? What country? The Germans. Actually, a lot of them were feathered. They were made out of feathers. And you can go online and find some of these. So the artificial Christmas trees were not manufactured in the U.S. until after 1900. In the 1930s, the Atis Brush Company created the first artificial brush trees using the same machinery that made their toilet brushes. And these trees, it's true.
Hopefully not the same machine.
These are unused. And here you have, they also made those silver colored metallic artificial trees. Yeah. And you remember those? Oh, of course. And there I am with my mother, with my uncle's fake tree. I promise the last picture you're going to see of me, but I had all of these. And it's interesting, if you saw our film on the Norwich schools, you would have seen Helen Smith talking about how kids at her school, where's the school? Right there, right above her head, right?
It might be right around there.
Oh, okay. She said they all had to draw names here in Norwich and exchange a gift with whoever name they drew.
It's like 1930s.
In 1930s, that's right. And here's Albert DeVoe, and Albert's school here was at the Pompanusic, and Albert, if you go and watch the films, he talks about Wallace Waterman, who portrayed Santa Claus. It's actually a really good story because he said, Wallace was this tall, really thin guy who didn't look anything like a big Santa Claus. And he used to come to the school and distribute presents, and they would have pageants in the school and so on and so on. So do go and watch the film, but I wanted to include those. A couple other 20th century editions, you might remember Christmas seals.
Sure.
Not so popular today, right? But, still around. And those, yeah. And I found this, I'm not going to be able to talk too much about music because that's another whole lecture, but I did want to include these ladies here because they're from Vermont, bell ringing. They're from the South Church, I think that's in wait, hold on, I'll let you know. This is from 1936, when Virginia Jones purchased a 15 bell set of Swiss bells to use as an adjunct to a quartet. And these they continued to ring in this church here in Vermont for decades. But I just thought it was a really cool picture. Another recent addition to the Christmas holiday had to do with this fellow. He's purely 20th century. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer makes his first appearance in a Montgomery Ward booklet as a gift to customers in 1940, written by a Montgomery Ward employee, Robert May. And it was later popularized by a song, who knows? But who sang it? No. Gene Autry did it first. Gene Autry popularized it first. And here we have another one. And actually, Walter Newman, who's in the back, a paper conserver, told me that he actually conserved the original sheet music.
The original manuscript.
The original manuscript for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So he's now such a part of our celebrations, but he's really a recent addition. And I could also do a talk on Christmas movies, but I'm not. I'm just going to mention this because it's set where here in Vermont, right? And here we have another scene of it. But there's you could do a whole lecture just on Christmas movies, and now there are channels showing them non-stop. And Christmas decorations outside have gotten even larger and more elaborate, and I just include some. Now, every community seems to have their own celebrations too, and I think that's important. And here are some from Vermont. This is a celebration in Middlebury at the top, and the bottom is, some of you might recognize, yes, Christmas celebration there. And you can see it decorated for the holidays too. So I know here in Vermont, you have, here in Norwich, you have certain traditions. Since 1960, Norwich has presented a Christmas pageant on a Thursday evening before Christmas with high school seniors playing the roles of angels, shepherds, Mary and Joseph, etc. They stop at the Norwich Inn and are summarily refused a room, ending up down the street at a large barn where everyone collects to sing carols and behold the Christ child. Right? Is that still going on? Yeah, very much so. And then some of you might know this in Woodstock. Yeah. How many of you have participated there? Some of you have no choice because you live in Woodstock. Yes. Okay. Yes. I get that. But Wassail Weekend, the entire town participates in the many free events, including a reading of A Child's Christmas in Wales at the library, ice skating, plays, music, a carol sing, the lighting of that accompanies the lighting of the Yule log, and so on, and concludes with the Messiah sing at Our Lady of the Snows Church. So I'm looking forward to going up there. This I found, which was really interesting. This couple, Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus, Euclid and Priscilla Farnham, have been, you know that? Yeah. Have been going to the Tunbridge, Vermont Public Library for their 35th annual visit to hear what the children would like for Christmas. Now that was in 2014, so I don't know if they're coming back this year. Yeah, probably. So yeah, I thought that was absolutely great. And Dartmouth is getting ready for its annual Christmas tree lighting on the green, so that's coming up Friday, December 4th, 4 to 8, just for a little advertisement there. And that's a picture from a previous year. Also with the holiday are so associated certain foods, and I could do a whole lecture on that, so I'm only giving you a taste. And this is from the French-Canadian tradition. What is it? Yeah, a meat pie. Yeah, a meat pie, that's right. Traditionally enjoyed at Christmas Eve and New Year's. I had to include this because I'm Italian. My favorite meal of the year is Christmas Eve with a feast of the 7 fishes, and so on. So, to wrap up, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see what this century brings that changes Christmas. Things are continuing to change. Stores opening on Thanksgiving Day now. A lot of controversy about that. We hear about that. Now you can go online, Cyber Monday, right? All of these things that you can do online. You can send Christmas cards. You can get Santa map. All of this done now electronically because as we become more of a tapped-in nation, Christmas is going to change and adapt, and so on. So, you know, Santa too has to be with the times. This was in the Boston Herald. Everyone's weight conscious, right? So Santa, you're too fat. You have to go on a diet. I know that well. So, yeah. So, Christmas is continuing to evolve and change. And that's what I started out by telling you. I hope that you could see from this lecture that Christmas was always not set in stone, but continues to change. People bring their own traditions, their family traditions, and I think that's what makes it so special in community too. So I want to end with a quote from an 1877 newspaper that seems to capture the feeling we have for the holiday even to this day. The observance of Christmas has become so universal in this country now that the day is regarded as the holiday of the year. Thanksgiving Day has had a succumb in importance to the festival, and even the glorious 4th has taken a back seat when compared with the 25th of December. Christmas is the day in which mirth and revelry is to be crowned as king and queen. So raise your Christmas trees, hang up your fairest of wreaths, sing your merriest songs, brush away all dark clouds, let in the sunshine, beckon happiness in at the front window while unhappiness is bowed at the back door, and let all do everything in their power to ensure for themselves and others a Merry Christmas. And let me be the first to wish you a Merry Christmas. Thank you. I went on a little bit longer, but if anyone has any burning questions, I'm happy to answer if I can.
How did Santa get his name?
Santa Claus, it was, it's a corruption of Saint Nicholas, Santa, Saint, Claus, Nicholas, it's a corruption of that. Because again, it's Washington Irving playing with that. Saint Nicholas's feast day is December 6th, okay? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. And then-
Back to New York,
Yeah.
when did Rockefeller Centers first have
Oh,
entry?
good question. I don't know.
New one for
I don't know. I'll have to look that up. I don't know. Do you know, Bob?
I don't.
No, okay. You had a question?
Yeah, my hometown, they had a kind of was an after Christmas celebration where everybody carted their trees to the curb.
Yeah.
And they had the burning of the greens. I wonder if that's still prominent.
You know, I actually have a picture that shows that some communities still do that, and it's partially, I think, just community building. You know,
Okay.
yeah,
Is it anything to do with Boxing Day, which is?
yeah. Boxing Day is December 26th.
Yeah.
And that's again, it goes along with that custom of celebrating at the holidays in overabundance. What were you gonna say?
In Canada, they celebrate that.
Oh, they do. Yeah.
Boxing Day.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just curious, maybe this is a difference between England and the States, but in A Christmas Carol, which was published in the 1840s, there's a lot of talk about how it's almost like Scrooge has forgotten the good old customs of the past, and you know his nephew is going to keep them up, and you know the games and the pleasantry and the dancing that you know
Right.
Mr. Fezziwig did, and you know, but Scrooge has become more commercial, and he doesn't want to give his clerk the day off, and
Right.
you know, so it's sort of like there's that commercialism, everything's there, but it's kind of like
Yep.
he's forgotten an older tradition. Is that his imagination?
I think he's implying that. I mean, the older traditions were feasting, singing, begging. Those go way back, but they're not religious. You know, they are about celebrating. It really does have to go back to the winter solstice. It really does go way back to that, the celebration of that. So I think that's partially Dickens just reading it that way.
Did he like create that whole thing about the blind man's bluff and the you know?
Oh no, I
fairy
had
days and-
no. Actually, I had scenes. It was very small in one of those group pictures of Blind Man's Bluff and so on. So no, those were things that were going on. But you know that's his fiction. He's telling a story. He's telling a moral too. You help the poor, right?
Right, yeah.
Who first puts it around on December 25th, I wonder?
Who puts Christmas on December 25th? That's a good question. No, it's not. Coolidge, of course. Bob, actually, that's a really basic question that I should know. And I think it does. I think it has something to do with the Catholic Church, but I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to check that. Good question. I am not.
Because it's after the solstice. It's
Yeah.
after the.
Again, it's around the time of the solstice because that's the 21st. And again, we talk about the Catholic Church trying to take those pagan holidays and meld them into one. But I believe it. The more I think about it, it's coming back to me. It was the Catholic Church. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to be around. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say one more thing. I thank you, Ken, but I omitted to thank a very special person who has helped us put all of the house together, Nancy Osgood. Super important.